You leave a conversation and something is missing. Not time, not patience. Something closer to the center than that. A specific kind of depletion that sleep doesn't fully fix and that you can't quite explain to anyone who wasn't there. You've probably blamed yourself for it. Told yourself you're too sensitive, that everyone gets tired, that this is just what relationships cost. Nietzsche would have told you to stop apologizing for noticing what is actually happening. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he wrote about what he called the weight-bearers, people who do not carry their own heaviness, but instead distribute it, quietly and continuously, into the lives of everyone close to them. He was not describing a personality type, he was describing a psychological mechanism, one that operates whether or not the person running it is conscious of doing so, and one that, once you learn to see it clearly, becomes impossible to unsee. If you have ever walked away from someone feeling smaller than you arrived, give this video a like right now, because what follows is going to name something you've been feeling without the right language for it. 1. They make every conversation about the gravitational pull of their own suffering. There is a difference between someone sharing pain and someone who has organized their entire relational identity around it. The first asks for presence. The second requires tribute. Elaine Hatfield, a psychologist at the University of Hawaii, spent decades researching what she called emotional contagion, the automatic, largely unconscious process by which human beings synchronize their emotional states with the people around them. Her research demonstrated that this synchronization is not metaphorical. It is neurological. Mirror neurons, facial mimicry, and postural alignment all contribute to a process in which prolonged exposure to another person's emotional state begins to reshape your own, without your conscious participation. What this means in practice, when you spend extended time with someone who is continuously broadcasting pain, anxiety, or grievance, your nervous system does not observe from a safe distance. It joins, it begins to carry what they are carrying. And because the transfer is gradual and below the threshold of awareness, you often don't notice until you're already depleted, wondering why a conversation that was supposed to be connection left you needing to recover. Nietzsche identified something adjacent to this in his concept of the morality of suffering, the way chronic pain, when it becomes the organizing principle of a person's identity, stops being a condition they are in and becomes a position they occupy, a role that grants them a specific kind of relational power, the power of the one who cannot be questioned, who cannot be asked to change because their suffering has become their justification for everything. The energy drain here is not cruelty, it is structure, and recognizing the structure is the first step toward not being consumed by it. 2. They reframe your boundaries as personal attacks. Setting a limit with certain people produces a response that is precisely disproportionate to what the limit actually was. You say you can't meet this week. You say you need some time to think. You say no to something that wasn't a significant request in any ordinary reading of the situation. And what comes back is not acceptance or even mild disappointment. It is injury, withdrawal, a silence weighted with implication, or a direct statement that reframes your limit as evidence of how little you care. This is one of the most reliable markers Nietzsche's framework would identify in what he described as slave morality. The inversion of values by which weakness becomes righteousness and the expression of strength becomes cruelty. In On the Genealogy of Morality, he traced how this inversion operates. The person who cannot tolerate the autonomy of others reframes that autonomy as aggression. Your independence becomes their wound. Your boundary becomes your crime. Psychologically, what is happening is that the energy-draining person has constructed a relational model in which your resources, your time, your attention, your availability are experienced as things they are owed rather than things you choose to give. When you withdraw any portion of what they have come to expect, the withdrawal is not processed as a neutral event. It is processed as betrayal. The result is that you spend an extraordinary amount of energy managing a guilt that was installed in you to prevent you from ever saying no. And the system works because the guilt feels real. It produces real discomfort, which means the limit costs you something whether you hold it or surrender it. That asymmetry, where you pay, regardless of what you choose, is not accidental. It is the mechanism. Think about a relationship in your life where your limits consistently produce more conflict than your compliance. Comment below, "I recognize this." Just that. Because recognition, before anything else, is what changes the equation. 3. They move through conversations like audits, not exchanges. There is a particular quality to conversations with energy-draining people that takes time to identify because it superficially resembles interest. They ask questions. They want to know things. They engage with the details of your life with an attention that initially feels like care. But look more carefully at the structure. Their questions extract. They pull information about your situation, your vulnerabilities, your relationships, your fears. And what moves in return is minimal, not because they're consciously hoarding, because the conversation is not, at its core, an exchange. It is a processing session in which you are the resource being processed. Goffman's work on interaction described something he called the interaction membrane, the implicit negotiation in every social encounter about what will be shared, by whom, and what will be offered in return. Healthy interaction maintains a rough equilibrium across that membrane. What draining people do, often without awareness, is puncture it in one direction. They create a sustained flow from you toward them while the reverse channel stays largely closed. The exhaustion this produces is specific. It's not the tiredness of having talked too long. It is the particular depletion of having given without receiving, of having been present for someone in a way that was never genuinely reciprocated. Nietzsche would have recognized this as a failure of what he called the gift-giving virtue. The distinction between giving that flows from genuine abundance and taking that is dressed in the language of connection. The auditing person is not connecting with you. They are harvesting you, and the harvest continues for as long as you make yourself available to it. 4. They treat your progress as a threat that requires managing. This one is the most disorienting of the 6 because it arrives wearing the face of concern. You make a decision. You start something. You change a pattern that wasn't working. And the person who claims to be closest to you responds not with the uncomplicated support that the moment seems to call for, but with questions designed to introduce doubt. Are you sure about this? Have you thought it through? That seems risky. I just don't want to see you get hurt. Nietzsche wrote in Beyond Good and Evil about what he called the herd instinct, the deep, often unconscious drive in certain people to maintain the leveling of those around them. Not because they want you to fail, but because your rising creates a comparison they cannot comfortably inhabit. Your movement highlights their stillness. Your courage makes their inertia visible in a way that produces discomfort they do not know how to process directly. So they process it sideways, through doubt, through caution, through a concern so carefully constructed that it is almost impossible to name as what it is without sounding paranoid or ungrateful. The energy drain here is cumulative and insidious. It is the slow erosion of the confidence required to take action, the gradual replacement of your own judgment with a negotiated version that keeps you in the range where they feel safe. You don't stop moving entirely. You just move smaller. Stay closer. Take less. And over time, you may not even notice how much of your original direction has been quietly redirected by their persistent management of your ambitions. This channel exists outside the algorithm. No sponsorships, no brand deals, just research, writing, and the belief that ideas sharp enough to change how you see yourself are worth protecting. If this analysis has given you something real, a framework for something you've been living inside without a name for it. Consider supporting this work directly through the link in the description. Every contribution keeps this independent, and that independence is what allows this kind of honesty. 5. They require you to maintain two emotional states simultaneously. Yours and theirs. This is the most physically exhausting feature of relationships with draining people, and it is almost never discussed in the terms that make it legible. In any healthy interaction, you are responsible for your own internal state and available, to a reasonable degree, to another person's. The emotional labor is shared. It distributes. But with certain people, the distribution collapses entirely. You're expected to monitor their emotional state, anticipate its fluctuations, adjust your own behavior to prevent its deterioration, and manage the fallout when it deteriorates anyway. All while maintaining enough surface composure that the dynamic doesn't become visible to the outside. Clinical psychology has documented this pattern most thoroughly in research on relationships with individuals who exhibit narcissistic or borderline features, where the emotional regulation of the more fragile person becomes, de facto, the responsibility of the person closest to them. The result is what researchers describe as hypervigilance, a state of sustained alertness in which you are scanning, continuously, for signs of what is coming and how to prevent it. Hypervigilance is not a metaphor. It is a physiological state. It maintains elevated cortisol, disrupts sleep architecture, impairs the prefrontal cortex's capacity for clear decision-making, and produces exactly the kind of chronic, sourceless fatigue that makes you feel like the problem is you rather than the relational structure you're operating inside. Nietzsche's diagnosis of this would have been characteristically unsparing. You have allowed someone else's chaos to become your jurisdiction. And the first requirement for reclaiming your energy is recognizing that the chaos was never yours to manage in the first place. 6. They make you feel guilty for recovering. The final mechanism is perhaps the most elegant, in the darkest possible sense of that word. You create some distance. You take time for yourself. You let a few messages go unanswered for longer than usual. Or you decline an invitation, or you simply spend a day not being available to anyone's needs but your own. And when you return, if the relationship has this quality, you find that your recovery has been experienced as a form of abandonment. They were worried about you. They didn't know what they'd done wrong. They thought maybe something had happened. The language of concern arrives precisely calibrated to the size of the space you created. Large enough to make you feel that your self-care was actually selfishness, small enough that if you tried to name what was happening, it would sound like an accusation against someone who was only worried about you. What this does, over time, is make recovery itself feel unsafe. You learn, not consciously, but functionally, that the cost of taking care of yourself is a debt you'll have to pay on return. So you stop taking the space. You stay continuously available because continuous availability is cheaper than the guilt that follows any withdrawal from it. Nietzsche called the highest expression of human freedom the capacity to act from your own values rather than in reaction to the expectations of others. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Zarathustra repeatedly descends from the mountain, not because the valley demands it, but because he has something to give that comes from having first been alone, first been silent, first been fully with himself. The descent is chosen, not extracted. What draining people ultimately prevent, across all 6 of these mechanisms, is that solitude, that return to yourself that makes genuine giving possible. They fill every available space with need, and then frame the filling as relationship. Now, let's close this honestly. Because there are 2 readings of this conversation and both of them matter. The first is practical. You have people in your life who drain you, and understanding the mechanisms is the beginning of deciding what to do about it. That might mean distance. It might mean limits stated clearly and held without apology. It might mean having a conversation you've been avoiding. It might mean accepting finally that some people are not going to change, and that the energy you've been spending waiting for that change could be redirected towards something that actually grows. The second reading is harder. Look at these 6 patterns and ask yourself honestly, do any of them belong to you? Not as a verdict, as information. Because most people who drain others are not doing it from a position of power. They are doing it from a place of profound scarcity. A genuine, often unconscious belief that there is not enough available to them and that the only way to survive is to continuously draw from whoever is closest. Nietzsche was not interested in moral condemnation. He was interested in clarity. And the clearest thing he might say about energy drain, on either side of it, is this: you cannot give from a place you have emptied. You cannot offer genuine connection from a self that has been continuously extracted. The first obligation, before any relationship, is the restoration and protection of what you actually have to give. What's your experience with this? Have you recognized someone specific across these 6 patterns? Or have you seen something here that belongs to your own behavior in certain seasons of your life? Leave it in the comments. The honest answers are the ones worth reading. And if this kind of work, examining what actually happens between people beneath the surface of what it looks like, is something you want to continue, subscribe. Because the next video goes into territory that is connected to this one in ways that will become clear when you watch it. You cannot protect what you haven't learned to see.